Greyhawk is all the rage these days, being the default setting of the D&D 2024 remix and all, but truth is, there has been a better time to jump on the Greyhawk train. Back in 1980. Today, I'm making an adequate video on the setting that said, that'll do. Hey everybody, it's D from D&D Ditches, and today the D stands for Divide and Conquer. I've already released my October unboxing video and it's already an hour long. And I had a great big Greyhawk package that I wasn't able to fit into that video. So I'm releasing a separate bonus video to break up the pace. Let's check it out. So this is a Greyhawk pack. There are several books in this setting. So I'm not going to go through these books in the order that's currently presented. We're going to look at this book first, which is the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Greyhawk Adventures, released in 1998. So Greyhawk is the setting that's created by Gary Gygax. This was his home setting. He's one of the co-creators of Dungeons & Dragons. He's one of the co-founders of TSR, and he created the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons first edition rule set. And he pretty much oversaw everything that was done for first edition. And then came Lorraine Williams, who became the majority stockholder, and Gary Gygax left TSR in 1986. Post Gary's departure, TSR could basically do whatever they wanted with the Greyhawk setting, and that's exactly what they did. So this book is very interesting because it was released in 1988 and second edition came out in 1989. And you see this label that says compatible with the AD&D and the second edition AD&D game systems. So this book was written with some weird Frankensteining of first and second edition rules. So first and second edition weren't that different and they were largely compatible. But as we go through the book, you're going to see that there are certain things that's very first edition. For example, you see the attributes are laid out as strength, intelligence, wisdom. This is the classic attribute format, whereas from second edition onward, they changed it so that the first three attributes were your physical scores, strength, dexterity, and constitution, and the second three were your mental attributes, which were intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. However, we also have THAC0, which stands for 2-hit armor class 0, which was a second edition innovation. I'm using quote marks there because some people would say ironically. However, back in second edition days, that was actually an innovation. People shit on THAC0 these days, but you know what they did back in first edition? It was a table, and you didn't actually know what number you need to hit, and you need to refer to the number. Say, you know, this is armor class is 4, and therefore you need to go across the table and find, oh, I need to roll a 12, for example.
Hey guys, it's D here. I thought it would be easier to show you. In Advanced First Edition, the combat attack matrix were in the Dungeon Master's guide, so this was not even information that the players had access to. Take this table for clerics, druids, and monks. For this example, let's use a level 10 cleric attacking an opponent of AC 4. You scroll across to level 10, then down to the row with the opponent's armor class, and then the target number is 10. This means you'll need to roll a 10 or above to hit before bonuses and penalties. How this works is that the DM will need to have this page open the whole time, ask the players to roll to attack, and then cross-reference this table for every single attack, and the same with monster attacks too. With THAC0, 2-hit armor class 0, it literally says what it does. Level 10 cleric's THAC0 is 14, so they need to roll a 14 or above, and adjust it if the opponent's AC is better or worse. The easiest way is by remembering this formula. THAC0 minus number rolled equals best armor class you can hit. For example, I roll a 19. THAC0 14 minus 19 equals -5, which is the best AC my attack was able to hit. This means I can hit everything between base AC 10 up to the best AC of -5. I then check it against the monster stats, -3, which is the worst armor class at -5. Hence I tell my players, you hit. Now the descending armor class makes sense. There is a method to the madness after all. Y'all can stop shitting on THAC0. Now back to our regularly scheduled program.
Whereas knowing your THAC0, you could actually do some applied mathematics on the spot to work out the number that you need to hit. And because this was before the days of the internet and your smartphone doing everything for you, people weren't so averse to doing a little bit of math on the fly. This section is labeled Deities and Clerics of Greyhawk, where it gives you a rundown of the god itself, their avatar, and a brief description of that god's cleric. There are elements of second edition in here, so you see that under the cleric we have SPH, which stands for a sphere. So a sphere is a second edition mechanic. It denotes the spheres of magic or the types of magic which the cleric has access to. So they're a little bit like wizard schools, but it's more determined by the god's portfolio into what type of spells that they would likely grant. For example, the demigod Use, he is the god of oppression, deceit, and pain. SOC stands for sphere of control. So therefore, the clerics of Use has access to combat guardian, minor access to divination, healing, minor access to necromantic, summoning, and the reversed of the sun sphere spells. So essentially, this means that the clerics of Use would only be granted spells that aligns with the god's sphere of influence of their portfolio, which ties into oppression, deceit, and pain. Second edition, we have the generic clerics, but you can also have specialty priests. So all of these clerics that's listed for these gods all falls under the umbrella of a specialty cleric because they have access to spells which only mirrors that god's sphere of influence. Where it says minor, I think that they can only get up to either 3rd or 4th level spells. I can't remember exactly. Whereas major access means that they can grant up to 7th level spells. And back in 1st and 2nd edition, divine magic only went up to the 7th level. 8th and 9th level of divine spells came around due to 3rd edition. It never used to be a thing. So this book is not a campaign setting. The idea is that it provides campaign options for the DM to use with the Greyhawk setting that was released in early 80s. So we have some introduction of some new monsters. Now these monster stats are written in a 1st edition format, such as the experience value being variable depending on the monster's hit point. In 2nd edition, monsters had a fixed experience value. The book then moves on to the Hall of Heroes, with some NPCs that you can introduce to your game. So I'm not a big Greyhawk guy. I prefer my ice cream flavors to be a little bit spicier, and I see Greyhawk as having quite a bland vanilla flavor, so I was never really that interested. Gygax himself was really into wargaming, and D&D itself had a wargaming background, and I think sometimes it's a nice change of pace to play something that is a bit more historical fantasy focused. So this section covers the magical spells, and we have a lot of big names here like Nystal, Mordenkainen, and Bigby, and then we have Otaluk. You probably would recall spells named after these people, and these are very powerful archmages in the Greyhawk setting. For example, Otto from Otto's Irresistible Dance. So I believe 7 of the 8 names being presented here are part of the organization called the Council of 8. That is essentially everybody except for Mordenkainen. I think Mordenkainen sits outside of that. I think he's kind of like whoever that's actually above the Council of 8. I read through parts of the module called Vecna Lives, which the Council of 8 had a big part in. So that's the only reason I recognize that these names are from the Council of 8. And then we have Tensor from the spell Tensor Transformation. So this is the section where it gives you new spells that you can add to your game. The next part is the magical items of Greyhawk. These give you new items that you can use for your game. So going over this book, even though I don't know much about Greyhawk, it seems like this is a really good book for DM options. If you're running your game in Greyhawk, there's a lot of good things in this book that you can use for your game. The next section is called the Geography of Oath. Apparently that is how it's pronounced, Oath. This section provides you with expansions to the actual world itself, introduces some new locations, new plot hooks, new places to visit, and all that good stuff. And then towards the end of the book, we have Adventures in Greyhawk. So this is presented as an adventure, but what's interesting here is that this is a 0th level adventure. And I think towards the end of the book, we're going to find some rules on how to create 0th level characters. So 0th level characters are a really interesting concept because you can use it to tell your character's origin story, and I think at 0th level, you're not even given a class. You have to survive this adventure to become a level 1 character. So it says here the standard attributes are recorded but at preliminary values of 3. The characters also starts with 3 hit points. It says here that 0 level characters do not have experience points and instead have attribute points, and they begin the game with 90 plus 1d20. So the next section on raising ability scores, once per game week a character can assign 1 to 8 AP to a single attribute score or hit points. So okay, you can start adding points to your score. That's not too bad. I didn't read this section in detail, but I just read here that no amount of aptitude can give a 0th level character more than 18 hit points. 18 hit points is a lot. This is the equivalent of a 1st level fighter at maximum hit points, which is 10, plus 4 for 18 constitution, would only give them 14. So they can actually earn higher hit points than a maximum legal fighter. And even if you're using the Barbarian, which was added in a splat book later on with a D12 hit point, that's still 16 points. But it feels like this system could actually be quite fun. I need to read through it in more detail to really decide, but sounds like it's got some potential. We also have the Monk listed as a full class, but also the Bard listed as a full class. This is a bit of a best of both worlds of first and second, because Monk did not exist in second, and the old school players would know that the implementation of Bard leaves a lot to be desired, and second edition was able to implement the Bard a lot more competently. It talks about gaining skills and proficiencies, and then finally joining a character class. And then we have Oriental characters. This feels like it was implemented from the Oriental Adventures book, which only came out a few years prior to this book. So the next one we're going to take a look at is the Greyhawk Adventure, Flames of the Falcon. This was released in 1990 and as far as I know is a part of a trilogy. It says here the trilogy began with Falcon's Revenge and Falcon Master. Now the thrilling adventure concludes in this module. This is designed for 5 to 7 characters of 5th to 7th level. So there are several books in this pack that I received. And I don't exactly know what was included, and I don't even think that the seller really knew what they were selling, as in what was included. So there might be bits and pieces that's missing, but we're going to have a look. So the cover comes off in this module, and we have a map of the Daryl lair, Daryl's servants' quarters, and the city of Greyhawk, which is a cross-section. So clearly this adventure takes you underground. The cover looks like it's quite well used. And then we have a map. This map has grids on it. And then we have some unpunched cardstock with 3-dimensional models of the houses. So I think the idea would be you will punch these out and use them to create a 3-dimensional diorama type of terrain. I don't know how many pieces of cardstock this is supposed to come with, but so far this feels like it's complete. And the adventure booklet itself is 64 pages. You can play this module by either continuing the adventure from the previous module, where you would have learned about the cult of the Falcon, but there's also an option to start fresh. So as I don't know much about Greyhawk, I'm not going to provide much commentary in this case, but let's take a look at the artwork. One of the map provided was for the Darrow's cave, so that's a Darrow. I don't really know what the difference is between a Darrow or a Dorgar. So they present all of the NPCs in its own section after the adventure. And then some new magic. And some new monster entries. So this is the entry for the Darrow. It says that they are a degenerate race of the dwarven stature. So I take that to mean that they're a different race, but they're the same size as dwarves. And there are instructions here on how to assemble the 3D models. The next one that we'll take a look at is the Greyhawk supplement called the Marklands. This was released in 1993. So it mentions in the wake of the Greyhawk Wars. During the 2nd edition era, there was a box set called Greyhawk Wars, which essentially introduced the meta story of this great war that broke out. Subsequent to that, there was a box set called Greyhawk from the Ashes, which described the setting post the wars. And it changed up a lot of the countries in this setting. People who enjoy Greyhawk talks a lot about the politics of the different countries in this setting. So once again, the cover is separate from the book, and we also have an included map. And this is a map of the Marklands. So it shows the kingdom of Furiondi and the kingdom of Nerond. The book itself is 96 pages. So first goes into Furiondi with its history, its law, coinage and taxes, its relation with the other kingdoms, the day in the life of the local resident, and the gazetteer with the different towns and regions within the land. So you see on the outside that we've got some decoration with the heraldry, because I guess it really ties into the historical wargaming simulation aspect of the hobby. I have some digital PDFs of some Greyhawk products, and I remember seeing the artwork of the different heraldic emblems of the different countries being included. So that's going to interest a player who's really into the simulation of medieval warfare and politics and intrigue, which I believe is really at the roots of what this setting was founded on. So we moved on to Nyrond. So we have the different factions of the land. It introduces a plethora of NPCs in these countries. The next one is the City of Skulls. This was released in 1993, but I believe after the Marklands. It's an adventure suitable for 6 to 8 characters between levels 9 and 12, and also includes pre-generated characters suitable for this quest. So once again, the cover is detachable. On one side, we have the map of Dorakar, the City of Skulls. On the other side, we have a quick reference to the monster stats chart. I can see that there are a lot of Tanari in this module, which were the 2nd edition name for demons. The booklet itself is 64 pages. It says here, this adventure is not in capital suitable for evil aligned PCs. So the premise of this adventure says that Earl Homer was captured and imprisoned in the underground city prison. And this is essentially a search and rescue mission. Requires that the party breaks into the prison, find the prisoner, and then get out with minimal casualties. We have some pre-generated characters here, an 11th level human fighter, a 10th level human fighter, an 11th level priest, 11th level thief, 12th level illusionist, an elven fighter mage, and a half-elven druid mage. This section lists out some of the enemy squads that your party can encounter, the map for the Halls of Torment. From the description of this adventure and also the maps that's been presented, seem like this adventure is more or less a dungeon crawl. It has quite an old school vibe to it. Court of the Hazru, which is also a Tanari, or a demon. So seems like the end big bad are demons, which is definitely old school. Next up, let's take a look at Greyhawk, The Adventure Begins. You can see that the Greyhawk logo is slightly different, as previously the logo contained the word Adventures, whereas this just says Greyhawk. That's because this book was released in 1998, so I'm not the most knowledgeable when it comes to Greyhawk, but just through my research, it seems like the Greyhawk line was supported up until 1993. So the last couple of books that we looked at were some of the last one that were published in 1993 before the product was, I guess, cancelled. But it seems like in 1998 that they decided to relaunch this setting, and it has a new design. The 1998 line carried the revamped Greyhawk logo, and they all have this stylized temple gate on the cover, such as you can see on this one. So they all have this type of a format. So this book is essentially the relaunch of the Greyhawk setting. This book is 128 pages, and it starts with a reference to all the previous Greyhawk products that were published, and it makes a reference to the different waves of publications. So the last couple of books that we looked at were part of the 3rd wave as the campaign began in 1991, and this was part of the Greyhawk Wars era between 582 to 584 CY. And this book begins the 4th wave, and it moves the time forward to 591 CY, which is 7 years later than a previous wave. So the Gem of the Flanes, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing that word correctly, I'm not a Greyhawk buff, apparently refers to the city of Greyhawk. Then it goes through the history of the world of Oath. We have a section on the people. the culture, and then we move on to the calendar. Greyhawk works on a 7-day week, unlike Forgotten Realms, which work on a 10-day week. And then we have the climate, seasons. And if you're really into simulation, we have some weather tables, the wind direction, sunrise and sunset times, the effect of weather on the rules with references to the Dungeon Master guides. And then we move on to the domain and city of Greyhawk, the laws and crimes. And there we have the Circle of 8. I don't know if I said Council of 8 previously. If I did, I meant Circle of 8. So this book is not complete. It's supposed to be accompanied by another 16-page book of maps. As this book makes references to something else, C9, C10 for example, clearly it makes references to the accompanied map which is missing. And on the back we have another map. So it says on the back a 16-page map booklet with new and updated maps of towns and adventure sites in the Central Flanace. So that is Greyhawk The Adventure Begins. And then let's take a look at the Greyhawk Player's Guide. This was also released in 1998. And while The Adventure Begins is designed for DMs, this book is designed for the players. We have not only a detachable cover, which is this one. It shows the holy symbol of the gods, including Vecna, whom started as a lich and became a demigod. Vecna had a trilogy of adventure modules that centered around him in 2nd edition. And apart from that, we also have a map which is centered around the city of Greyhawk, which is right there. And there's the kingdom of Furiondi and the neighboring lands. And on the other side is the continental map of the different countries and how they relate to each other. The booklet itself is 64 pages, and unlike The Adventure Begins, it seems like this book is complete. We have some similar information being presented in this book, including the calendar, a list of runes and glyphs, the gods, the Circle of 8. So this gives a brief history on the Circle of 8 and is referred to as modern Canaan and the Circle of 8. It's like he is their leader. And there's been a couple of changes with the members of the Circle of 8. Then we have a section on the city of Greyhawk. This would have been a lot nicer if it was in color. Then we have the races. So Oiric is the continent where most of the adventures take place in. And then we have a section on role-playing the people. So the concept of role-playing has shifted a little bit from the 80s and 90s to nowadays. As back in the day, people felt like that they want to role-play characters that would come across as convincing per their race or background or culture. Because the game and the stories were a lot more about what's happening in the world. Whereas these days, it's a lot more character-centric. As the stories these days revolve a lot more around the player characters, so they feel a lot more empowered to do whatever they want kind of thing. And this is why a lot of the books published in the 90s would actually give you guides or recommendations on how to play a certain race or a certain culture or a certain class, especially in a setting like Greyhawk where a lot of people enjoy it because it comes from more of a historical simulation type of background. I'm not saying either style is good or bad, just saying why these books would give you a recommended way to roleplay your character. And towards the end we have some player character kits such as the Knights of Furiondi or a Greyhawk Thug, and it also allows you to play as a half-orc. So half-orcs existed in 1st edition, but was removed from the core races of 2nd edition, and was reintroduced back in the complete books of humanoids. So this book gives you all the information on how to play a half-orc. Now let's move on with the 2nd edition supplement called Castle Sites. So this book was released in 1995 and is a part of a trilogy of books. The other two were called City Sites and County Sites. This book is 96 pages. What this book set out to do is that it presents 7 different pre-made castles or fortresses with its layout maps the terrain, the layout, the exteriors, the interiors, the rooms and everything all designed for you, along with the major and minor NPCs for each site, that you're able to insert into your own game with its own adventure hook on how you could use this information. So the first one was called Korek Kolzil, and the second castle was called Cloudkeep. This looks like a floating fortress, although it's not very high up off the ground. And the premise is the tower. And this fortress is owned by a storm giant named Tabrilla Tempest, as she inherited Cloudkeep from her mother. So a couple of adventure hooks are given. The first one is that the Tempest family is looking for a new trade route. Then they essentially hire the PCs to secure a new trade route for them. And the second example that's been given is that matriarch Tabrilla. Actually, her name is Tabriya, not Tabrilla. That's two I's. So Tabriya has been known to exact harsh retributions for individuals who do not honor their trading contract with the Cloudkeep. And she hires the PC to track down someone who owes her a lot of money. The next one is Sentinel Stand. This one looks a little bit more like a military compound. And then we move on to Dragon's Coffin. I wish there were more artwork showing what the exterior of these places look like. The interior just make it all look like a stock standard castle of some type, like your standard Keep on the Borderlands type of situation. And then we have the Guardian, which seems to be situated in a valley between the Orclands, Human, and Elven lands. And then the next one is called Shadow Tor. So this one seems to be more of an abandoned keep. And as you would expect, it's filled with undead monsters, including half-whites, which I've never seen before. They seem to be 2 hit dice weaker than the standard whites. Still pretty deadly with the energy drain though. Good old energy drain from 2nd edition. Certainly made encounters with the undead super scary. I actually quite like this one because it's presented more like a location that you can go and adventure in, whereas the other ones are more like you're there for a story, even if it's owned by a 20th level lich. And the last one is just called the Watchtower. What's the CN Tower doing in my D&D game? And the last one that we're going to look at is the 2E Supplement Dungeon Builder's Guidebook. This was released in 1998 and also forms a part of a 2-book series. The other one is called World Builder's Guidebook. Now, at first I thought this book was not complete because there's also supposed to be a 16-page booklet included with it, but it's actually tucked inside. So the cover comes off. So these are called geomorphs. Let's have a look at the main book, which is 64 pages. So this is the book that helps you with designing your own dungeon. Part 1 provides basic philosophies behind creating dungeons, includes discussion on realism and dungeon design, ecology of the inhabitants, and atmosphere for dungeon adventures. Part 2 discusses various approaches. Part 3 gives you a variety of different dungeon floor plans, properties, and encounters to populate your dungeon. Part 4 tells you to throw in twists to create something unique. Part 5 is traps. Part 6 talks about random dungeon generation. And the remaining parts provides details on these geomorphs as presented. I love the cartoon panels. This is really fun. There are some nice artwork in this book as well. The topics here provide some good food for thought. So for me, the ecology of a dungeon is really important. So back in the 70s and 80s, random encounters in a dungeon was a big thing. You would move into a new room of a dungeon and the DM would roll the dice to see what kind of creature in that room, so you end up with a hodgepodge of different types of creatures, which may not make sense on how they can coexist together. So for me, the believability is a big thing when it comes to dungeons. I don't run a lot of dungeon crawls myself, but I think it could be quite fun with the right group of people, with the right mix of classes. Now we reach the part with dungeon examples. So this is an aerial dungeon. So it seems like this aerial castle is to be used with the aerial founding geomorph, which is this one. So the numbers of the different landings. So number 3 is Garden on High, and we've got Abiding Cloud for number 4, and number 5 is a Cemetery. And for the castle interiors from 6 onwards is actually presented inside this book where it says Aerial Focus Geomorph. So this is an example of a dungeon where you can actually use this as the exterior and this map as the interior, as described in the book itself. Second one is just Castle, which is this one. And once again, halfway through, we need to refer to the other booklet, which is this geomorph for the interior of the castle. And then Interdimensional, which is this fun one over here. So this is presented as a demiplane in the deep ethereal. And what I've noticed is that this book is written by Bruce Cordell. Bruce Cordell also wrote one of the Planescape supplements called, no surprises here, A Guide to the Ethereal Plane. And for the interdimensional geomorph, there are many different examples, including a detailed one over here, which is located on the 986th layer of the Abyss. And that one looks like this. This actually looks really fun, and it actually looks like something that I would actually use in my Planescape games. And some of the other interdimensional geomorphs are presented here. This is the planar tree, could be Yggdrasil for example. Floating spheres, vortex to the positive or negative energy plane, nasty. A portal maze, I hate these, absolutely hate these. I absolutely hate them in video games. I would absolutely not use this ever. The living demiplane, this is interesting, is like inside a stomach. Fortress of the Four Spheres, where it links between the primary elemental planes and the para-elemental planes. Also reminds me a little bit of Temple of Elemental Evil. So yeah, they look really fun. And then the next one is the Mine Natural Cavern, which is this one. And of course, you can't have cavern without the drow. And this is the Focus Geograph. And then we have Ruin or Tomb, which is this one. This one features wogs and bugbears. And then the Focus Geomorph is this big one over here. And the last one we have is Underwater. It's a giant squid by the looks of things. And also the Focus Geomorph, this one. So that's the main book. So the booklet provides you with some sample geomorphs that you can trace from. The focus geomorphs are covered inside the book. They've already been fleshed out for you, so you can just plonk them into your game, ready to play. I love the creativity with the interdimensional ones. The aerial ones are like, yeah, okay, well, and then the castle ones, yeah, stock standard. Ruins Tomb. And Underwater. I like this one with the sunken ship, and this one is a cross section that's actually interesting. It reminds me of Castlevania, kind of like a side-scrolling kind of idea. And this one's more interesting for me because it implies that your characters need to not only navigate but also manage their air supply or find some way that they can breathe. So they're working with a time limit. So I think some of the underwater ones and the interdimensional ones are the best ones presented in this book. The other ones are just like, yeah, whatever. So this is the book that helps you with designing your own dungeons. I actually quite like this. I really appreciate the sample designs that's been given to you. You can just drop them in and ready to play tonight. Hey, thanks for checking out my video. Like what you saw? Like and subscribe. And let me know down in the comments if there's anything else you want to see. Until next time, hope we get to hang out again in my next video.